Malik, take a good look. This isn't an opportunity. This is where poor men's dreams come to die.
Then watch me bury my dream here and dig up an empire.
A man like you building an empire from this dump, I'm selling it to you for $900 just to watch you fail.
Preston Whitmore looked down on me as nothing more than a poor black man.
Then he sold me the broken building for $900, thinking he had just dumped a worthless problem on a desperate black man. But what Preston didn't know was that behind those cracked walls was the truth about stolen land, buried family history, and a community waiting for someone brave enough to fight back.
I didn't just reopen a diner. I reopened a wound the city had tried to hide. And when the truth finally came out, Preston lost everything he thought made him untouchable.
My name is Malik Johnson. I was 34 years old, black, tired, and still wearing the white chef's jacket from the restaurant that had fired me that morning. Not because I burned the food, not because I failed the customers. I was fired because a waiter at the Sterling Room, a luxury restaurant in downtown Savannah, served the wrong table, and my manager decided the easiest man to blame was the black chef standing closest to the kitchen door. That manager was Gerald Huxley, a thin white man in his 50s with silver glasses, slick gray hair, and a smile that always looked polite until he needed someone to step on. He told me, "Malik, people like you should be grateful you even had a chance here." People like me. I had heard those words in 100 different ways. By noon, I was walking along the edge of Savannah with my final paycheck folded in my pocket. My mother, Denise Johnson, was waiting at home. She was 58, gentle, proud, and fighting a weak heart with the kind of quiet strength only mothers have. She never asked me for anything, but every pill bottle on her dresser reminded me that love still came with a price. Then there was my little sister, Tasha Johnson, 21 years old, sharp-tongued, beautiful, and smarter than she believed. She had been studying media production at community college, but that morning she texted me, "I might have to drop out, Malik. Tuition is due Friday." I stopped walking when I saw the building. The sign above it barely hung from one rusted chain. Magnolia Diner. The windows were cracked. The paint peeled like old skin. Weeds grew through the sidewalk. Someone had spray-painted "Rat Hole" across the side wall. Most folks passed it without looking twice. But I looked. And for a second, I saw lights in the windows. I saw people laughing in booths. I saw coffee pouring, chicken frying, and a place where no one had to lower their eyes just to be served. That was when Preston Whitmore stepped out of a black town car behind me. Preston was a wealthy, white real estate CEO in his late 50s, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a navy suit that probably cost more than my mother's hospital bill. His dark hair was combed back perfectly, and his smile carried the kind of arrogance money gives a man when nobody has told him no in years. He looked from me to the diner and smirked. "Malik Johnson," he said, like my name tasted cheap in his mouth. "I heard about what happened at the Sterling Room." I said nothing. He walked beside me and stared at the ruined building. "Look at this place. Broken glass, rotten walls, bad history." Then he turned to me. "Honestly, a man like you should be grateful for whatever he can get." My hands tightened, but I kept my voice calm. "How much?" Preston laughed. "For this dump? $900. I knew he thought he was humiliating me. I knew he saw a poor black man desperate enough to buy failure with his last dollar. But I reached into my pocket, pulled out my folded paycheck, and handed him the money. For the first time, his smile slipped. Across the street, an elderly black woman watched us from her porch. She was Miss Evelyn Carter, small and thin, with silver braids tucked beneath a flowered scarf, and eyes that looked like they had seen every secret Savannah tried to bury. She didn't speak. She just watched me take the keys. And when Preston walked away laughing, I stood in front of Magnolia Diner, holding that rusty key like it was not the end of my life, but the first door God had finally opened. The next morning I unlocked Magnolia Diner before sunrise. The street was still quiet, and the air smelled like damp wood, dust, and old grease. I stood in the doorway for a while, staring at the cracked counter, the torn red stools, and the ceiling fan that looked like it had not moved in 20 years. Part of me wondered if Preston Whitmore had been right. Maybe I had bought a graveyard for dreams. But then I thought about my mother's tired smile, Tasha's tuition, and the way that man had smirked at me. So I rolled up my sleeves, found an old broom in the corner, and started cleaning. By noon, Tasha showed up with a camera around her neck and 2 gas station coffees in her hands. My sister, Tasha Johnson, had always carried herself like she was already filming the documentary of her own life. Quick eyes, fast mouth, and a mind that noticed everything. "If you're really doing this," she said, looking around the ruined diner, "then I'm recording it. One day people are going to want to know where it started." I laughed, but she didn't. She aimed her camera at the broken booths, the dusty kitchen, and me standing there like a man trying to make courage look normal. While clearing the back kitchen, I noticed one section of the wall sounded different when I tapped it. Hollow. The plaster around it was cracked, and behind an old metal shelf, someone had covered a small square with mismatched wood. I grabbed a crowbar and pulled it loose. A cloud of dust hit my face. Inside the wall was a rusted tin box wrapped in a faded kitchen towel. My hand slowed as I lifted it out. Something about that box felt too carefully hidden to be trash. Tasha stopped filming and came closer. Inside the box was an old recipe notebook with yellowed pages, several black and white photographs, and a letter sealed but never mailed. The name written on the front of the notebook was Isaiah Freeman. I did not know him then, but the face in the photographs told me he had once been a proud man. Isaiah was a tall black chef with broad shoulders, a clean white apron, and eyes that looked straight into the camera, as if he knew the world was trying to erase him, but had failed. In one photo, he stood outside Magnolia Diner with workers, truck drivers, church ladies, and children lined up behind him. That was when Miss Evelyn Carter appeared at the kitchen door. I had not heard her come in. She was the elderly woman from across the street, small enough to be overlooked, but with a voice steady enough to make a room respect her. Her silver braids were tucked under the same flowered scarf, and her hands rested on a wooden cane. She looked at the notebook, then at me, and whispered, "I wondered when someone would find that." Miss Evelyn told us she had worked at Magnolia Diner when she was 17. Back then, Isaiah Freeman fed black dock workers after midnight, gave free coffee to tired teachers, and kept a back booth open for local pastors who helped families when landlords and bosses tried to push them out. Then Tasha picked up one photograph and went quiet. "Malik," she said, turning it toward me. "Look at this man." Standing beside Isaiah Freeman, younger than I had ever seen him, was my grandfather, Walter Johnson, my father's father, a serious black man with deep-set eyes and the same square jaw I saw in my mirror every morning. He was holding a tray of biscuits and smiling like he belonged there. My chest tightened. Suddenly, Magnolia Diner was no longer just an abandoned building I had bought with my last $900. It was a place my blood had walked through before me, and for the first time, I wondered if I had found this diner by accident, or if God had led me back to something my family had lost. I spent the next week inside Magnolia Diner with dust in my hair, paint on my hands, and barely $40 left after buying cleaning supplies. Every chair had a problem. Every table wobbled like it had survived a storm. The walls were stained yellow from years of smoke and neglect, and the kitchen smelled like old oil no matter how many times I scrubbed it. But each morning, I unlocked that door anyway. I sanded the tabletops myself. I patched torn booth seats with cheap vinyl. I painted the walls a warm cream color, because Miss Evelyn said Isaiah Freeman always believed a diner should feel like morning, even at midnight. Tasha came by after class with her camera and filmed everything. She filmed me standing on a ladder, fixing a crooked light. She filmed me burning my first batch of biscuits from Isaiah's notebook. She filmed me reading recipes out loud like I was trying to hear the old chef's voice between the lines. At first, I told her not to post any of it. I did not want the whole city watching me fail. But Tasha said, "Malik, if people get to see them laugh at you, they should also get to see you stand back up." So she uploaded the first video with the title, "My brother bought a dead diner with his last $900. It got 12 views. 3 of them were probably from us. A few people did come inside during those first days, mostly out of curiosity. But curiosity did not always mean kindness. One white couple stepped through the door, looked at me behind the counter, then looked at each other like they had made a mistake. The woman whispered, "Oh," as if my face had changed the flavor of the food before I cooked it. They turned around and left without sitting down. Another man in a golf shirt asked if the real owner was around. When I told him he was looking at him, he laughed like I had told a joke. That laughter stayed with me longer than I wanted to admit. Then came the blog post. A local gossip blogger named Carter Mills, a pale, sharp-faced man in his early 30s who made a living mocking struggling businesses online, posted a picture of Magnolia Diner with my name under it. The headline read, "From fired chef to king of the dump." He called the diner a tax write-off with a stove and said Savannah was about to witness the fastest black-owned failure in town. Tasha wanted to reply immediately, but I told her not to. My mother always said you cannot season food with anger and expect it to feed anybody. Still, I printed the article and taped it inside the kitchen door where only I could see it. Every insult became fuel. By the end of that week, I noticed a boy standing outside the window almost every afternoon. He was thin, maybe 13, with dark skin, oversized sneakers, and a green hoodie with one sleeve torn near the wrist. His name was Jamal Reed, though I did not learn that until later. At first, he ran whenever I opened the door. But one evening, while testing Isaiah's chicken stew recipe, I placed a bowl on the front step and said, "You can take it or leave it, no questions." He waited until I went back inside, then ate the whole thing sitting on the curb. The next day he came back. This time he helped me carry broken chairs to the alley. After that, I told him he could sweep after school in exchange for dinner and a few dollars when I had them. Across town, Preston Whitmore heard what I was doing and laughed so hard, according to one of his assistants, that he nearly spilled bourbon on his desk. In his mind, I was not rebuilding anything. I was just delaying the inevitable. He told people I would be broke in a month, and that once I failed, he would buy the land back for almost nothing. I did not know it yet, but Preston was already imagining luxury apartments where Magnolia Diners stood. Meanwhile, I kept painting, cooking, and posting videos nobody watched. The city laughed at me. Preston waited for me to collapse. But every night, when Jamal swept the floor and Tasha's camera light blinked red in the corner, Magnolia Diner looked a little less dead than the day before. The first dish that made people stop laughing was Isaiah Freeman's honey butter fried chicken. I found the recipe on a stained page in his old notebook, written in careful cursive with 3 words underlined twice. Patience before heat. I did not understand it at first. I had fried chicken 1,000 times in restaurant kitchens, but this recipe felt different. It called for buttermilk, smoked paprika, cracked pepper, a little cayenne, and honey folded into melted butter at the very end. It was not fancy food. It was the kind of food that made a tired person sit down and remember they were human. The first stranger who ordered it was a truck driver named Raymond Cole, a heavy-set black man in his late 40s with tired eyes, oil-stained hands, and a voice rough from long highways. He came in because his rig had overheated 2 blocks away, not because he believed in Magnolia Diner. He sat at the counter, looked at the patched stools, and said, "Man, I hope this chicken tastes better than this building looks." I almost laughed. Instead, I put Isaiah's recipe in front of him. 3 pieces of fried chicken, hot biscuits, collard greens, and honey butter dripping down the side like gold. Raymond took 1 bite and stopped chewing for a second. Then he closed his eyes. "Who taught you this?" he asked. I told him the recipe came from a man named Isaiah Freeman. Raymond lowered his fork and said his father used to talk about this place. By the time he left, he ordered 2 extra plates to go. The next morning, 3 more truck drivers came in. By the end of the week, Magnolia Diner had a line of people at lunch. Not a big one, but enough to make the griddle stay hot and Jamal smile while sweeping the floor. Tasha filmed everything. My sister had started taking the videos more seriously, adding captions, old photos, and short clips of Miss Evelyn talking about what the diner used to be. "This is bigger than food," Tasha told me one afternoon. "People don't just want to watch you rebuild a diner. They want to know why this place mattered." She was already planning a small documentary, though all she had was a used camera, a cracked laptop, and the kind of stubborn hope that ran in our family. A few days later, while fixing the storage room behind the diner, Jamal and I moved a rotten wooden cabinet away from the back wall. Jamal Reed was still quiet most days, but he worked hard, like he was afraid kindness might disappear if he stopped earning it. Behind the cabinet, tucked under loose floorboards, we found a flat envelope wrapped in plastic. Inside was an old copy of a land deed, brittle around the edges but still readable. The document listed several black families as original owners of the block around Magnolia Diner. Then came a series of transfers, signatures, legal notices, and one name that made my stomach tighten. Whitmore Holdings. Not Preston's name directly, but his family's company. That evening, Miss Evelyn sat at one of the booths with the deed spread between us. Her face changed as she read it. She looked smaller somehow, like memory had placed a weight on her shoulders. She told me that years ago, white investors had used court fees, tax pressure, fake notices, and confusing contracts to force black families out of the neighborhood. They did not always need a gun, she said softly. Sometimes they used a pen, a judge, and a man who knew you could not afford a lawyer. Jamal stood near the counter, listening with both hands in his hoodie pocket. Then he said something I had not expected. His grandmother used to live on that same block before her family was pushed out. She had told him stories about a little yellow house with blue shutters, and about Magnolia Diner being the place where neighbors came when they had nowhere else to go. He looked at the deed, then at me, and whispered, "So they didn't just take buildings, they took people's whole lives." I did not know what to say. The chicken had brought customers through the door, but that paper had brought ghosts with them. For the first time, I understood that Magnolia Diner was not only my second chance. It was evidence. It was memory. It was a piece of a story powerful men had buried under contracts and concrete. And as Tasha turned on her camera, I realized we were no longer just rebuilding a diner. We were beginning to uncover why someone had wanted it forgotten. By the time Magnolia Diner started filling half its booths at lunch, I had almost forgotten what silence sounded like. The bell above the door rang every few minutes. Truck drivers came for Isaiah Freeman's honey butter fried chicken. Church ladies ordered sweet tea and biscuits. A few teachers from the nearby elementary school began stopping in after work, bringing papers to grade while they ate at the counter. For the first time since I bought that old place, I could see the diner breathing again. Then, one morning, I arrived before sunrise and found the front window shattered across the sidewalk. For a moment, I just stood there with the keys in my hand. Broken glass glittered under the streetlight like ice. The front door hung slightly open. Inside, chairs were overturned, sugar jars smashed, and the refrigerator door had been forced open so long that the food inside had spoiled. But the worst part was not the damage. It was the words sprayed across the cream-colored wall I had painted with my own hands. Ugly racial slurs meant to remind me exactly who some people believed I was. Jamal was the first to see me standing there. The boy came running from the corner with his backpack bouncing against his shoulder. His face changed when he looked inside. Jamal Reed, still only 13 and still too young to carry that much fear in his eyes, whispered, "Mr. Malik, why would somebody do this?" I wanted to tell him it was just hate. I wanted to tell him it was weakness wearing a mask. But the truth was heavier than both. So I picked up a bucket, filled it with soap and water, and handed him a rag. "They can make a wall dirty," I told him, scrubbing the first cruel word until my arms burned. "But they can't make us dirty. They can break glass, but they can't break what this place means." The police officer who came an hour later did not seem nearly as angry as he should have been. His name was Officer Dale Mercer, a broad white man in his 40s with a shaved head, tired eyes, and a notebook he barely opened. He glanced at the broken window, asked if I had any enemies, then suggested it might have been kids messing around. Tasha nearly exploded. She pointed at the wall and said, "Kids don't write things like that by accident." Officer Mercer shrugged and said they would look into it, but his voice already sounded like the case was closed. Tasha filmed everything. The shattered glass, the ruined food, the wall before I finished cleaning it, even Officer Mercer walking back to his patrol car without taking proper photos. She did not cry while filming. That was how I knew she was furious. By noon, she had posted the video online with a simple caption, "They tried to destroy my brother's diner because he refused to disappear." For the first time, people watched. Then they shared it. Then strangers began commenting, asking where Magnolia Diner was and how they could help. By sunset, they came. Miss Evelyn arrived first with 2 cans of paint and a look on her face that said she had seen this kind of hatred before and was tired of letting it win. Raymond Cole brought 3 truck drivers with plywood for the window. A retired carpenter named Earl Simmons, a gray-bearded black man with a tool belt older than me, fixed the front door without asking for payment. Teachers brought groceries. Church members brought folding chairs. One woman placed a jar on the counter with a handwritten sign, "For Magnolia Diner." Near the back of the crowd stood a woman I had never seen before. She was Claire Bennett, a white local reporter in her mid-30s with auburn hair, sharp green eyes, and a small recorder in her hand. She did not rush toward me like she wanted a headline. She watched first, listened carefully, then asked Tasha if she could learn more about the diner, the land deed, and why people were suddenly willing to fight for it. I told her the story was bigger than a broken window. That night, after the last volunteer left, Jamal stayed behind and helped me stack the new groceries. He was quiet for a long time. Then he looked at the cleaned wall, the repaired door, and the stove waiting for morning. "Mr. Malik," he said, "I think I want to be a chef one day." I looked at him, and something in my chest softened. For the first time since the vandalism, I smiled. "Then tomorrow," I said, "we start with biscuits." 3 days after the vandalism, Magnolia Diner was busier than it had ever been, but I could feel the tension beneath every plate I served. People were not only coming for fried chicken anymore, they were coming because they had seen Tasha's video. They had seen the broken window, the hateful words, and the way the community came back stronger. That afternoon, while Jamal was wiping down tables and Miss Evelyn was sitting in her usual booth near the window, a black town car pulled up outside. Preston Whitmore stepped out wearing a charcoal suit, polished shoes, and the same cold smile he had worn the day he sold me the diner. He looked around at the full booths like the sight personally offended him. Preston walked in without greeting anyone and placed a white envelope on the counter. $50,000, he said, cash offer, more than generous for a place like this. I looked at the envelope but did not touch it. He lowered his voice, though not enough to hide his contempt. "You had your little moment, Malik. People felt sorry for you, but attention fades, bills do not." I told him Magnolia Diner was not for sale. His smile disappeared. For the first time I saw the man behind the money, a man used to owning rooms, land, and people's silence. "A man like you," he said, "doesn't know how to manage valuable property." Behind him, near the register, Tasha stood with her phone half hidden in her apron pocket, recording every word. When Preston left, Claire Bennett arrived with a folder tucked under her arm and worry written across her face. Claire had spent 2 days digging through city records, planning notices, and old property transfers. She spread the documents across the counter and pointed to a proposed luxury apartment project called Whitmore Landing. The development covered several blocks around Magnolia Diner, land that had once belonged to black families before being pushed through suspicious transfers years earlier. Claire tapped the map with her finger. "This diner is the missing piece," she said. "If you keep it, Preston cannot complete the project as planned." Suddenly, his offer was not generosity. It was desperation dressed in a suit. That evening, Tasha posted the recording. She did not add dramatic music. She did not need to. Preston's own voice did the damage. Within hours, people online were furious. Some called him racist. Some demanded the city investigate Whitmore Holdings. Others shared their own family stories about homes, shops, and churches lost to powerful men who hid behind paperwork. Tasha's video spread faster than anything she had ever posted. The same people who had laughed at my little sister's 12 views were now asking her for interviews. She looked scared for the first time, not because the truth was weak, but because it had finally become loud. Late that night, after the diner closed, Miss Evelyn handed me the unopened letter we had found in Isaiah Freeman's tin box. "I kept waiting for the right time," she said. "I think this is it." The paper was fragile, and Isaiah's handwriting trembled near the end. He wrote that Magnolia Diner had never been just his business. It was a shelter, a meeting place, a table for people who were told they did not belong anywhere else. His final line made my throat tighten. "If this place ever finds its way into honest hands again, do not let them turn it into something that forgets us." I folded the letter carefully, feeling the weight of a man I had never met asking me not to surrender. When I got home, my mother was sitting at the kitchen table with her pill bottles lined up beside a cup of tea. Denise Johnson looked weaker than she had the week before, but her eyes were still steady. I told her about Preston's offer. $50,000 could pay medical bills, help Tasha stay in school, and give us breathing room we had not had in years. My mother listened, then reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. "Baby," she said, "some things God puts in your hands are not meant to be traded for comfort. Sometimes He gives you a burden, because he knows you are strong enough to carry it. I knew then that I could not sell. Magnolia Diner was no longer only my chance. It was my test. The city council chamber was already packed when I walked in. I had never seen that many people gathered for a zoning meeting before. Some came because they had seen Tasha's video. Some came because Claire Bennett's first article had raised questions about Whitmore Landing. Others came because they remembered Magnolia Diner before the paint peeled, before the windows cracked, before powerful men decided the neighborhood was worth more without the people who built it. I walked in with Tasha on one side, Miss Evelyn on the other, Jamal close behind me, and Claire carrying a folder thick enough to make Preston Whitmore's lawyers nervous. Preston was already there, sitting near the front in a tailored suit, surrounded by city officials and 2 attorneys. He did not look at me like a man afraid of the truth. He looked at me like a man annoyed that truth had entered a room he believed he owned. Several council members greeted him warmly, shaking his hand, smiling too long, laughing at comments none of us could hear. One of them, Councilman Richard Baines, a heavy white man with a red face and gold watch, kept calling Preston an important partner for Savannah's future. I knew then that the room was not neutral. It had already been prepared for him. When public comments began, Claire presented the first documents. She explained the proposed luxury development, the old land transfers, and the way Magnolia Diner sat at the center of the project map like a locked door Preston could not open. The council members listened politely, but I could see some of them shifting in their seats, waiting for her to finish. Then Preston's attorney stood and called the accusations emotional speculation. He said the city needed progress, housing, investment, and a modern vision. He never once said the names of the families who had been pushed out. To him, they were just obstacles buried in old paperwork. Then Miss Evelyn stood. She moved slowly, leaning on her cane, but the room quieted before she even reached the microphone. Miss Evelyn Carter looked small beneath the bright lights, yet her voice filled the chamber like a church bell. She told them she had worked at Magnolia Diner when she was 17. She described Isaiah Freeman cooking through the night for dock workers who could not eat in certain restaurants, teachers who were paid less than they deserved, and mothers who came in with children and no money. She spoke of men in suits arriving with papers poor families did not understand, of tax notices appearing too late, of neighbors losing homes one signature at a time. By the time she finished, no one was checking their phone. Then Tasha connected her laptop to the projector. My little sister's hands shook, but her voice did not. She played the video of me sweeping the diner alone, burning biscuits, fixing tables, and serving the first plates of fried chicken. She showed the hateful words sprayed on the wall. She showed the old deed with the names of black families. She played Preston's recording. A man like you doesn't know how to manage valuable property. The room erupted. People gasped, shouted, and turned toward Preston, whose face had gone pale under the council lights. Before the mayor could restore order, Jamal stepped toward the microphone. He looked terrified, but he did not run. Jamal Reed, the quiet boy who once ate stew from the front step, stood before the whole city and said, "Magnolia Diner was the first place somebody gave me food without asking if I had money." His voice cracked. "Mr. Malik didn't just give me dinner. He made me feel like I was worth saving." The chamber went silent again, but this time the silence felt different. It felt like shame. It felt like recognition. After Jamal spoke, others began to stand. A retired teacher said her father had lost a house on that block. A church deacon said his uncle had been pressured into signing away land he could not read the terms for. Raymond Cole stood with his work cap in his hands and said Magnolia Diner had become a place where drivers, families, and forgotten people were treated with dignity. One by one, people who had been quiet for years found their voices. Preston kept whispering to his attorneys, "But there are some fires money cannot put out once they reach the public." By the end of the meeting, the council had no choice. The mayor announced that Whitmore Landing would be temporarily suspended, while the city opened a formal review into the land transfers and Preston's development permits. It was not victory yet, not all the way. But it was the first time Preston Whitmore had been forced to stop moving forward. When I walked out of the chamber, people clapped. Not for me alone, but for all of us. Tasha hugged me. Miss Evelyn wiped her eyes. Jamal stood a little taller beside me, and I finally understood something. I had walked into Magnolia Diner thinking I was fighting to save my own future, but now I knew I was no longer fighting alone. 6 months after the city council meeting, Magnolia Diner no longer looked like the place Preston Whitmore had called junk. The cracked windows were gone. The old sign had been restored, but beneath it we added a new one in bold black letters. Magnolia Diner, built from what they threw away. Every morning before the doors opened, people were already lined up along the sidewalk. Some came for Isaiah Freeman's honey butter fried chicken. Some came because they had seen Tasha's documentary. Others came simply because Magnolia had become more than a restaurant. It had become proof that a man could be mocked, wounded, and still rise. Inside, I hung 2 framed photographs near the front counter. One was of Isaiah Freeman standing proud in his white apron. The other was of my grandfather, Walter Johnson, smiling beside him with a tray of biscuits in his hands. Every time I passed those pictures, I felt like they were watching over the place. Not like ghosts, but like witnesses. They had seen what was stolen, and now they were seeing what had been restored. The reopening ceremony happened on a bright Saturday morning. Reporters filled the sidewalk. Neighbors crowded around the entrance. My mother, Denise Johnson, sat in the front row wearing her best blue dress. Her health had improved since I could finally afford her medicine and proper care, but what moved me most was not how much stronger she looked. It was the pride in her eyes. She looked at me like the shame Preston tried to put on my back had turned into a crown. Miss Evelyn Carter was the one I asked to cut the ribbon. She tried to refuse at first, saying her hands were too old and shaky. But I told her Magnolia Diner remembered her, and the city needed to remember her too. When she lifted the scissors, the crowd went quiet. Then she cut the red ribbon, and the street erupted in cheers. For a moment she closed her eyes, and I knew she was thinking of Isaiah, of the old neighborhood, and of all the people who never got to see this day. Jamal stood beside me in a clean apron with his name stitched on the chest. He was the first student in our free cooking program for teenagers who needed a place to belong. That morning, he made biscuits without burning them once. When I teased him about becoming better than me, he looked down, smiled, and said, "Mr. Malik, you were the first person who ever believed in me." I had to turn away for a second because those words hit deeper than any applause. Then Preston Whitmore arrived. No town car driver opened the door for him this time. No city officials rushed to shake his hand. He stood across the street in a wrinkled suit, thinner than before, his face pale under the camera flashes. Whitmore Landing had been canceled. His company was under investigation for land fraud. Investors had pulled out. The man who once laughed at me for buying a broken diner now stood outside it, watching people line up around the block to get inside. Our eyes met through the crowd. I could have walked over. I could have reminded him of every insult, every smirk, every word he used to make me feel small. But I did not. I simply turned back toward Magnolia Diner and opened the door for the next family waiting to eat. That was my revenge. Not anger, not shouting, not becoming the kind of man Preston was. My revenge was the smell of fried chicken filling the street. It was my mother smiling without fear. It was Tasha receiving a media scholarship because her documentary had forced a city to listen. It was Jamal learning that his future did not have to look like his past. It was Miss Evelyn standing in the doorway of a place history tried to erase. Preston had sold me a dump for $900 because he thought a poor black man could only fail. But he was wrong. In the right hands, what the world throws away can become an empire. And that was how Magnolia Diner became more than a restaurant to me. It became proof that the world can look at a poor black man and see nothing but failure, while God is quietly placing a purpose in his hands. Preston Whitmore looked down on me because of my skin, my poverty, and the place I came from. He thought a broken building was all I deserved, but God took the very thing he called worthless and turned it into a blessing for an entire community. Maybe you have been judged before because of your race, your background, your clothes, or the money in your pocket. Maybe someone looked at you and decided your value before they ever heard your story. But remember this, people may see your struggle, but God sees your purpose. So let me ask you, do you believe Preston got what he deserved? And have you ever seen someone rise after being underestimated? Share your thoughts in the comments. If this story touched your heart, please like this video and subscribe to the channel to hear more powerful and emotional stories like this.